The Space Marines have long been considered the epitome of humanity's might, a force unparalleled in both strength and discipline. Their very existence has been a symbol of the Emperor's will and the Imperium's unyielding determination to survive against the galaxy's myriad horrors. But what if this era of dominance is starting to fade? What if the age of the Space Marines, once an unshakable cornerstone of the Imperium's power, is slowly but inevitably coming to an end? For millennia, the Space Marines have been the galaxy's most feared warriors, each one a living weapon, bred for war. They have been the sword and shield of the Imperium, battling the Xenos, Chaos, and traitors with unparalleled ferocity. Yet, the galaxy is changing. New threats are rising, old alliances are crumbling, and the very foundations of the Imperium are shifting beneath the boots of the Adeptus Astartes. In this exploration, we're going to dive deep into why the Space Marines, for all their glory, might be on the brink of irrelevance in a galaxy that's evolving faster than they can adapt. Are the once immovable forces of the Emperor's will starting to show cracks? Can they survive the cosmic upheaval that threatens not just their survival, but their purpose? Let's find out. The Space Marines, or the Adeptus Astartes, were conceived at a time when the Imperium was but a fractured, disjointed entity, its survival hanging by the thinnest of threads. Born from the mind of the Emperor of mankind, their creation was not just a matter of military necessity, but also a desperate bid to ensure humanity's survival against the horrors of the galaxy. The Emperor, a godlike figure with unmatched knowledge and foresight, saw that to unite mankind under one banner, he needed soldiers who could conquer the universe's vastness, withstand its myriad dangers, and above all, inspire hope in the hearts of the downtrodden. But these soldiers needed to be more than just men. They needed to be living weapons, the very best humanity had to offer. And so the Space Marines were born. They were not just soldiers, they were the Emperor's vision made flesh. Each of them was enhanced with powerful gene seed, a gift that would transform them into something more than human, turning them into towering figures of muscle, fury, and indomitable willpower. They were the Emperor's greatest creation, a force designed to lead humanity into a golden age of unity and enlightenment, an age that, sadly, never came to pass. What's truly fascinating about the Space Marines is the purpose they served in the galaxy. They were originally created as the Emperor's shock troops, each chapter of Astartes, an independent force dedicated to conquest, loyalty, and war. With their superhuman abilities and genetically engineered bodies, they were meant to be the ideal instruments of the Emperor's vision, swift, deadly, and capable of turning the tide of any battle. But as we all know, that dream of a united Imperium, of a peaceful future under the Emperor's rule, was shattered. The Space Marines, instead of becoming the cornerstone of a new age of humanity, became the symbol of a broken dream. Their legacy, however, is undeniable. These warriors stood as the embodiment of the Emperor's will across countless worlds. The Great Crusade, which sought to bring unity to the galaxy, relied on their ferocity and dedication. The Imperium was built on the backs of these superhuman soldiers who fought in countless wars, from the pacification of rebellious worlds to the bloody battles of the heresy. Their role in shaping the galaxy's history is etched into the very fabric of time itself. Whether it was the betrayal of Horus, the fall of the traitor legions, or the eventual secession of the Chaos Gods, the Space Marines stood at the forefront, and their legacy would forever be tied to the galaxy's most tumultuous moments. But as the centuries wore on, cracks began to appear. The galaxy, for all its vastness and glory, was not static. New forces, new factions began to rise, and the Space Marines, for all their might, found themselves struggling to keep pace with a universe that refused to stop evolving. The great warriors who had once been the unchallenged protectors of humanity now found themselves outmatched by newer, faster, and sometimes more ruthless adversaries. The rise of the Xenos, the return of the Necrons, the growth of the Tyranids, and the insidious power of the Chaos Gods. These were just some of the threats that would slowly push the Space Marines to the edge of obsolescence. However, what's truly fascinating is how fans view the Space Marines today. There are those who see them as the ultimate example of the Emperor's legacy, an unstoppable force that will always fight to the last, no matter the cost. Others see them as tragic heroes, soldiers trapped in a never-ending cycle of warfare, unable to adapt to the changing realities of the galaxy. Some fans even wonder if the Space Marines, for all their might, are fundamentally flawed. Their unshakable loyalty to the Emperor, their inability to change with the times, and their blind devotion to a lost cause, all contributing to their eventual downfall. There's a certain romanticism in the idea of the Space Marines. They are warriors bound by honor, tradition, and a sense of duty that is beyond comprehension. Their strength and courage are unmatched, and yet they are slowly fading into the background as newer, more efficient forces rise to prominence. It's as if the galaxy itself is slowly rejecting the very ideals that the Space Marines represent, moving away from the old ways and embracing a future that no longer needs them. And that, perhaps, is the most tragic thing of all. The Space Marines, for all their glory, are also a reflection of humanity's fallibility. They were born from the Emperor's vision, but they are, in many ways, just as flawed as the Imperium itself. Their creation, their role, and their legacy are all tied to a galaxy that is constantly changing, a galaxy that may soon no longer have a place for them. The age of the Space Marines, once an unstoppable force, may very well be coming to an end, not because they were defeated in battle, but because the galaxy simply moved on without them. As we look to the future, it's clear that the Space Marines' role in the galaxy is being called into question. Are they still the answer to the galaxy's problems, or have they become relics of a bygone age? Some believe that they can adapt, that they will continue to fight on, no matter the odds. Others wonder if their time has passed, and if the galaxy is ready for something new. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. The Space Marines' legacy is a testament to the power of humanity's greatest vision, and whether they remain or fade into obscurity, that legacy will never be forgotten. As the centuries have passed in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, the face of warfare has evolved in ways unimaginable to the Emperor and his first creation, the Space Marines. These superhuman warriors were designed to be the ultimate fighting force, a blend of biology and technology honed to perfection for a singular purpose: to conquer and defend in a galaxy rife with endless conflict. Yet, as the Imperium continues to decay and new factions rise, the very nature of combat is changing, and with it, the relevance of the Space Marines. When the Space Marines were first created, the galaxy was in the midst of a brutal, galaxy-spanning crusade, a time when humanity needed champions capable of facing the horrors of alien invasions, traitors, and the forces of chaos. Their enhanced abilities, immense strength, and tactical acumen were more than enough to overwhelm enemies that often relied on sheer numbers or basic weaponry. But the universe has not stood still, and neither has warfare. What worked in the past may no longer be effective in the future. The technological leaps that have occurred in the millennia since their creation are enough to make even the most battle-hardened Space Marine question his place in this new age of warfare. One of the most glaring shifts has been the rise of advanced technologies that overshadow the once mighty power of the Astartes. Where once the Space Marines relied on their strength and speed, bolstered by their powerful suits of power armor, today's enemies are far more sophisticated. The Tyranids, for example, have evolved into a constantly adapting swarm, with the ability to evolve new traits and strengths on the fly. The Necrons, with their advanced technology and near immortality, present a terrifying foe that can manipulate time and space itself, making even the mighty Astartes feel like mere mortals in comparison. And let's not forget the Chaos Forces, whose mutations and sorceries have grown more potent with every passing millennium, shifting the battlefield in ways that the Space Marines struggle to understand, let alone combat. What does this mean for the Space Marines? Can they keep up with the technological advancements that seem to outpace their ability to adapt? The answer is murky. On one hand, the Astartes have always prided themselves on their adaptability, constantly evolving their tactics and strategies to combat any threat. They have weathered the storms of the heresy, the rise of the orcs, the endless onslaught of the Tyranids, and so much more. But the modern age of warfare seems to demand a different kind of soldier, one that relies not just on sheer strength and battlefield experience, but also on advanced technology, psychic powers, and long-range strikes that can wipe out entire armies from orbit. This leads us to the growing reliance on mechanized forces. While the Space Marines have access to some of the most advanced vehicles in the galaxy, from the mighty Land Raider to the faster, more agile Razorbacks, these vehicles are starting to feel increasingly obsolete. In a galaxy where Titans, massive walking war machines, tower over even the most advanced tanks and artillery, the Space Marines' transport options seem primitive in comparison. And this isn't just a matter of size and firepower, it's also about strategy. As warfare increasingly shifts to involve long-range, high-tech weaponry, the traditional close-quarters combat that the Space Marines excel at is becoming less and less effective. The emergence of more powerful psychic abilities also poses a challenge. In a universe where psychers are becoming more prominent, the Space Marines, despite their own access to psychic powers, are not immune to the overwhelming might of the warp. The growth of psyker factions like the Thousand Sons, who have mastered the very fabric of the warp, presents an existential threat to the Imperium itself. These beings, along with others like the Thousand Sons sorcerers and the enigmatic figures within the Dark Mechanicum, can influence entire battlefields with their psychic might. The question arises, can the Astartes, with their relatively rudimentary psychic abilities compared to these powerhouses, maintain their edge in combat? Then there's the changing nature of war itself. The galaxy has grown more interconnected, with powerful warships and weapons capable of reaching across vast distances, delivering death from afar with pinpoint accuracy. The Space Marines, who have always relied on being in the thick of the fight, now find themselves struggling to keep up with an era that values long-range firepower over brute strength. Advanced technology like the Imperial Navy's massive battleships or the Tau's powerful railguns are often more effective at destroying enemies before they even reach the battlefield, making the traditional role of the Space Marines as shock troops seem increasingly obsolete. The Astartes may be strong, but they are facing enemies that are just as deadly, and sometimes more so, in different ways. And it's not just the external threats that the Space Marines must contend with. The very nature of the Imperium, the empire they swore to protect, is undergoing a transformation. The once unified Imperium is fracturing under the weight of its own corruption and bureaucracy. With the Emperor trapped on the Golden Throne and his distant leadership more symbolic than practical, the Space Marines' role as the enforcers of his will is becoming muddled. Some factions of the Imperium have begun to seek their own answers, branching out into new, sometimes more dangerous, forms of warfare. The rise of the Adeptus Mechanicus, with their increasing focus on machine and artificial intelligence, hints at a future where humanity may look to replace the Space Marines with something more efficient. What's even more unsettling for many fans of the Space Marines is the increasing recognition of the galaxy's tendency to move forward, leaving behind the old ways. In a universe where survival means adapting, where new technologies constantly replace the old, there's a growing feeling that the Space Marines might just be relics of a bygone age. Some fan theories even suggest that the rise of new powers, whether through genetic manipulation, psychic ability, or advanced war machines, will render the Astartes obsolete in the coming centuries. That while they remain symbols of humanity's strength, they are slowly becoming less and less relevant in the face of evolving threats. This shift in the nature of warfare has led some to question whether the Space Marines will ever truly be able to adapt. Sure, they've survived countless battles and fought through the most tumultuous wars the galaxy has ever known. But the question now is whether they can continue to evolve in the face of such powerful, ever-changing threats. The Imperium may rely on them for now, but what happens when the galaxy demands something different? The Space Marines are, after all, bound by their very nature, created to fight a war that no longer exists. As the universe changes, so too must their tactics, their strategies, and perhaps their very purpose. But the question remains, will they change in time, or will the tides of war wash them away like so many forgotten relics of a time long past? The Space Marines, for all their might and glory, were never just soldiers. They were symbols of the Emperor's grand vision for humanity. For centuries, they stood as the unyielding backbone of the Imperium, enforcing his will across the stars. But as time passed, cracks began to appear, not only in the Imperium's foundation, but also in the very unity that once made it so formidable. The dissolution of unity within the Imperium has set in motion a series of events that could ultimately signal the decline of the Space Marines' dominance in the galaxy. The golden age of their unquestioned power is fading, and it's becoming increasingly clear that the future may not have a place for them at the forefront of the Imperium's defense. To understand the shift, we must look at the state of the Imperium itself. Once a unified, single-minded empire under the Emperor's guidance, the Imperium now faces a deep, growing fracture within its ranks. The loss of the Emperor's direct leadership after the heresy and his entombment on the Golden Throne marked the first critical blow to the unity of mankind. The Emperor's vision, which once bound the galaxy together, is now more of a distant myth than a guiding principle. His will, once enforced through the might of the Space Marines, has since been reduced to vague doctrines and increasingly fragmented interpretations. The fractured state of the Imperium is a breeding ground for internal strife, political infighting, and the emergence of powerful factions that seek to carve their own path rather than remain loyal to a single, unified cause. This breakdown of unity has profound consequences for the Space Marines. For all their strength and loyalty, they are not immune to the shifting tides of politics. The Space Marines were once the unquestioned enforcers of the Emperor's will, but now, as different factions within the Imperium vie for power, their role is being questioned. The Adeptus Mechanicus, with their growing technological influence, has begun to position themselves as a dominant force, focusing on the future of humanity through machines and artificial intelligence rather than relying on the flesh and blood of the Astartes. The Inquisition, with its shadowy influence, has become a state unto itself, operating outside the direct control of the Imperium's central leadership. And even the Imperial Guard, once a humble but vital force, has risen in prominence, with commanders growing increasingly disillusioned by the Space Marines' perceived detachment from the realities of warfare. Some fans theorize that the Space Marines' very existence has become anachronistic in the face of these new, emerging factions. Their role as the Emperor's enforcers, once central to the Imperial war effort, is now being questioned as the galaxy continues to evolve. The rise of the Astra Militarum, bolstered by advanced technology and a greater focus on strategy and organization, means that the Imperium might no longer need the Astartes as much as they once did. With armies of regular humans and advanced weaponry that can level entire cities, why keep relying on elite warriors whose strength and prowess, while still impressive, are no longer as decisive as they once were? The fracture in the Imperium's unity isn't just political, it's also ideological. The Emperor's vision, which was once a shining beacon that united humanity, has been splintered into countless different sects and beliefs. The ecclesiarchy, with its fervent worship of the Emperor, has created a culture of fanaticism that has distanced humanity from the Emperor's original ideals. The imperial cult has become more about blind devotion than understanding the Emperor's true purpose. This shift in religious fervor has, in turn, strained the relationship between the Space Marines and the common people of the Imperium. While the Astartes are still revered as mighty warriors, they are also increasingly seen as relics of a bygone era, warriors who serve a dying god, bound by ancient oaths that no longer hold the same weight in the eyes of the Imperium's ever-changing political and religious landscape. The rise of new threats only accelerates this decline. The Tyranids, an unstoppable swarm of bioengineered creatures, threaten to devour the very fabric of the Imperium. The Necrons, with their ancient technology and unstoppable armies, have returned to reclaim the galaxy they once ruled. Even the forces of chaos, once thought to be pushed back by the Space Marines, continue to rise, with new warbands and powerful new entities challenging the Imperium on every front. The Imperium, rather than uniting against these threats, is torn apart by its internal divisions, making it easier for these forces to exploit the cracks in its foundation. Fan opinions are divided on the role of the Space Marines in this shifting landscape. Some believe that the Space Marines will always hold their place at the top of the Imperium's hierarchy, no matter how fractured the Imperium becomes. After all, their devotion to the Emperor and their unyielding strength make them formidable opponents in any battle. Others argue that the Space Marines are becoming increasingly irrelevant, caught in an era that no longer needs them in the same way. As warfare continues to evolve, the Space Marines may find themselves left behind, relics of a past age that can no longer keep pace with the technological advancements and new tactics emerging within the Imperium. Some fans even suggest that the fall of the Imperium's unity could eventually lead to the dissolution of the Space Marines altogether. The Astartes, after all, were created as the Emperor's personal enforcers, designed to carry out his will in a galaxy torn apart by war. But as the Imperium drifts further from the Emperor's original vision, the need for a unified galaxy-spanning military force may diminish. The rise of powerful, independent factions could push the Space Marines into the background, relegating them to the role of symbols rather than active participants in the galaxy's ongoing conflicts. The political fragmentation of the Imperium and its weakening unity also raises questions about the future of the Space Marines' power structure. The different chapters, once unified in their purpose, now operate increasingly independently of one another. Some chapters, like the Ultramarines, still adhere closely to the old ways of the Emperor's teachings, but others, like the Black Templars, have diverged from the original intent of the Space Marines, growing increasingly independent in their beliefs and tactics. This lack of cohesion among the Astartes themselves could be a sign that the once unified force is beginning to crumble from within, just as the Imperium itself has. At the heart of all this is the simple question: what is the Space Marines' purpose in a fractured Imperium? Are they still the Emperor's chosen warriors, or have they become pawns in a game they no longer control? As the galaxy moves away from unity and towards chaos, the Space Marines may find that their place in the grand scheme of things is no longer guaranteed. The fall of the Imperium's unity is a stark reminder that no one, not even the Emperor's greatest warriors, is immune to the ravages of time and political disintegration. For millennia, the Space Marines have been the galaxy's unchallenged warriors, the Emperor's finest soldiers who stood as humanity's vanguard in a universe filled with unimaginable horrors. But even the mightiest empires are eventually challenged, and the emergence of new, devastating factions in the galaxy has placed the once dominant Space Marines in a precarious position. The Tyranids, Necrons, and Chaos forces, each one an apocalyptic threat in its own right, have risen from the shadows, shaking the foundations of the Imperium and threatening to push the Space Marines to the brink. The Tyranids, in particular, represent one of the most terrifying forces the galaxy has ever known. A relentless, consuming swarm of bioengineered creatures, the Tyranids are unlike any foe the Space Marines have ever faced. Their entire existence is built around the singular purpose of consuming all life, and their vast hive fleets tear through the stars, leaving nothing in their wake. The Tyranids are not bound by the conventional rules of war. They don't care for tactics, strategy, or diplomacy. Instead, they adapt, mutate, and evolve on the fly. Each encounter with the Tyranids is a battle of survival, a test of endurance against an enemy that learns from every fight. For the Space Marines, who were created to fight with purpose and precision, the Tyranids present an overwhelming challenge. Their numbers are endless, their adaptability terrifying. The Space Marines, despite their enhanced strength and battle prowess, are not immune to the mindless hunger of the Tyranid swarm. The Tyranid hive mind controls an almost incomprehensible force of creatures, each one functioning as part of a vast, unified whole. No single strategy, no matter how brilliant, can guarantee victory against an enemy that is always evolving and adjusting to its surroundings. The Space Marines, for all their power, are facing a threat that will not be contained by their usual tactics. And with each passing battle, they find themselves pushed further and further back, retreating to the very edge of survival. Then there are the Necrons, an ancient race of robotic beings whose return to the galaxy marks a new era of warfare. The Necrons were once the masters of the galaxy, ruling over a vast empire of living beings before their fall into a mechanical existence. Now, millennia later, they have awoken from their slumber, and the galaxy trembles at their return. With their advanced technology, unyielding durability, and nearly immortal bodies, the Necrons present a different kind of threat to the Space Marines. Their weapons are unlike anything the Imperium has seen before, capable of tearing apart the very fabric of reality itself. Their technology is not based on the crude, often inefficient methods of the Imperium, but instead on methods that are both alien and terrifying in their effectiveness. The Necrons do not care about honor, strategy, or even the concept of victory. They are an ancient, cold force driven by a singular, chilling purpose: to reclaim what they lost. In this sense, the Necrons are unlike the Tyranids, who are driven by an insatiable hunger, or the forces of chaos, who are driven by madness. The Necrons are driven by an unfeeling, unyielding desire to dominate the galaxy once again, and the Space Marines, for all their might, are simply another obstacle in their path. They cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with, and they certainly cannot be stopped by conventional means. The Necrons are methodical, patient, and unrelenting, qualities that make them a perfect counterpoint to the often chaotic and desperate nature of the Space Marines' campaigns. Then there is the ever-present threat of chaos. Unlike the Tyranids or the Necrons, who operate with a singular goal in mind, chaos is a far more insidious force. It is a corruption of the very fabric of existence itself, an influence that pervades everything it touches, twisting minds, bodies, and souls. The Chaos Gods, with their myriad followers, are ever present in the galaxy, and their reach has only grown with time. The forces of chaos are not a singular faction, but rather a collection of ever-shifting power, each Chaos God representing a different aspect of corruption, madness, and destruction. The Chaos Space Marines, once loyal to the Emperor, now serve the whims of their dark masters, and they bring with them the full fury of their twisted, nightmarish powers. For the Space Marines, chaos represents a direct threat, one that is not just external, but internal. The forces of chaos are not merely enemies to be fought. They are the very embodiment of what the Space Marines could become if they fall from grace. The allure of chaos has tempted even the most loyal of Astartes, and the stories of Primarch's turned traitor are etched into the annals of history. With each new chaos invasion, the lines between the loyalist and traitor Space Marines blur even further. The sheer raw power of chaos is not something that can be easily fought with conventional methods. It is an enemy that attacks the very soul, the very will of the Space Marines themselves. To fight against chaos is to battle not just for survival, but for the very soul of the Imperium. What's perhaps most unsettling about the rise of these factions is the way they are redefining the nature of war in the galaxy. The Tyranids, with their sheer numbers and ability to adapt, have turned warfare into a test of endurance. The Necrons, with their near-immortal warriors and advanced technology, have turned the battlefields into places of cold, unfeeling annihilation. And Chaos, with its dark sorcery and corrupting influence, has turned the very fabric of reality into a weapon. In this new era, the Space Marines' traditional methods of war, brute force, honor, and tactics, are increasingly ineffective. Fans have long debated whether the Space Marines can continue to hold their place in the galaxy, given the rise of these new factions. Some believe that the Astartes will always have a role to play, that their resilience and sheer willpower will carry them through even the darkest of times. Others are less optimistic, wondering if the Space Marines are too tied to old ways of thinking, unable to adapt to the new threats that are sweeping across the galaxy. It's clear that the forces rising against the Imperium are unlike anything the Space Marines have ever faced, and it's uncertain whether they can survive in a galaxy that is changing faster than they can keep up. As the Tyranids, Necrons, and Chaos forces continue to grow in strength, the Space Marines may find themselves facing an enemy that they cannot defeat through strength alone. The galaxy is no longer just a battlefield of warriors and honor. It is a battlefield of ideas, technologies, and powers beyond mortal comprehension. And in this new war, the Space Marines, once the galaxy's most unstoppable force, are starting to seem less like conquerors and more like relics of a past age. The rise of these new factions is not just a challenge to the Space Marines. It's a challenge to everything they represent. Whether they can adapt, survive, or fade into obscurity remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. The galaxy is no longer a place that is ruled by the Emperor's finest soldiers. It's a place where new powers are emerging, and the Space Marines are struggling to hold on to their dominance. The Mechanicus, the technologically advanced and almost fanatical faction of the Imperium, has long stood as a pillar of the Imperium's war machine. While the Space Marines were the sword, the Mechanicus was the hammer, providing the tools and weaponry that allowed the Imperium to stand firm against the galaxy's horrors. However, in recent years, there's been an undeniable shift in the Imperium's reliance on the Mechanicus. As the galaxy becomes more treacherous and warfare evolves, some have begun to question whether the Space Marines, with their ancient and rigid ways of warfare, are still as vital as they once were in the face of this growing technological revolution. The Mechanicus was originally created to serve humanity's technological needs, to maintain and grow the vast, nearly incomprehensible machinery that powered the Imperium's war efforts. As the millennia have passed, their role has expanded, and they've become not just the caretakers of ancient technology, but also the developers of new, terrifyingly advanced war machines. The weapons of war they provide, massive war machines like Titans, advanced combat vehicles, and weaponized dreadnoughts, are becoming more and more central to the Imperium's defense. The Space Marines, as mighty as they are, have to rely on this technology, as do the Imperial Guard and even the Adeptus Custodes. In essence, the Adeptus Mechanicus is becoming the backbone of the Imperium's war machine. Their expertise in producing and maintaining war machines and advanced weaponry means that the Imperium can continue to wage its endless wars, even as the manpower of humanity begins to dwindle. The technological advancements that the Adeptus Mechanicus has spearheaded are slowly replacing the need for human warriors. New technologies, once unimaginable to the Imperium, are now the norm. The rise of super-heavy tanks, weapons that can obliterate entire armies with a single shot, and the increasing use of artificial intelligence and augmented soldiers are shifting the battlefield away from the close combat tactics the Space Marines excelled at and into a more distant, machine-based conflict. This shift raises an uncomfortable question for the Space Marines. Are they becoming obsolete in a galaxy that is rapidly turning toward mechanized warfare? The ancient power armor that was once the pinnacle of human technology is now no more than a relic of the past. Yes, it still offers the Space Marines near invulnerability in battle, but in an era where entire battalions of machines can engage enemies across vast distances. How long will the Astartes be able to maintain their relevance? Some fan theories suggest that the Space Marines, while still powerful, are becoming increasingly outpaced by the machines they rely on. The idea of the super soldier is being challenged by the rise of the super machine, be it the titans of the Adeptus Mechanicus or the automated war engines of the Imperial Guard. The tactics that once defined the Space Marines, close-quarters combat and lightning-fast assaults, seem increasingly impractical in a world where battles are fought with orbital bombardments and long-range weapons. The emergence of autonomous war machines driven by artificial intelligence only furthers this dilemma. The Adeptus Mechanicus has long held a monopoly on the development of new technologies, including the use of machine spirits, artificial intelligences embedded within their creations. While the Imperium has maintained a strict doctrine against the use of fully autonomous machines, this technology has continued to evolve. The possibility of creating autonomous war machines capable of making decisions in real time without human intervention looms ever closer. Such machines would remove the need for human soldiers, including the Space Marines, to be at the forefront of battle. It's not hard to see why this would be an unsettling prospect for the Astartes. Machines that could think, adapt, and execute missions without the need for a living, breathing warrior. Of course, there's another side to this story. Many fans argue that the Space Marines will always be vital, despite the rise of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The argument is that the Astartes are more than just soldiers. They are living symbols of humanity's defiance in a galaxy filled with terror. They are the Emperor's finest, bound to him by blood, gene seed, and a deep, unshakable sense of duty. Their strength, courage, and faith in the Emperor are what make them more than mere warriors. They are icons, and that iconography cannot be replaced by machines. In this view, the Space Marines will continue to be the Imperium's most visible symbol of resistance against the darkness, no matter how the nature of warfare changes. Some fans have suggested that while the Adeptus Mechanicus may take the lead in terms of technology and weapons production, the Space Marines will remain crucial as the heart of the Imperium's war efforts. The Astartes are the ones who will fight in the trenches, lead the charge, and rally the troops. Their presence on the battlefield, their sheer power and determination, is what inspires the rest of humanity to stand strong against the encroaching darkness. No machine, no matter how powerful, can replicate that. But there's an undeniable truth that seems to be growing clearer with each passing battle. Technology is moving at an alarming rate, and the Adeptus Mechanicus is at the forefront of this technological revolution. While the Space Marines can hold their own in a direct confrontation, the scale of modern warfare is shifting in a way that leaves them at a disadvantage. The Imperium is increasingly relying on technological solutions to solve its problems. The Astra Militarum now fields massive armies of super-heavy tanks, artillery, and battle mechs that can overwhelm entire worlds, while the Adeptus Mechanicus provides the backbone of the Imperium's war effort through their mechanical marvels. The rise of these new technologies is forcing the Space Marines to adapt, but the question remains, can they adapt fast enough? The Astartes' role as the galaxy's most elite soldiers is being challenged not just by other factions, but by their own Imperium. The very thing they have fought for, humanity's dominance, may soon be undermined by the technology they rely on. Some fans speculate that the Space Marines will become increasingly sidelined as the Imperium invests more heavily in robotic and artificial intelligence solutions, leading to a future where their role is reduced to ceremonial and symbolic importance. Others argue that the Space Marines will evolve, adapting to the changing landscape by integrating more advanced technologies into their ranks, thus remaining relevant in a world increasingly dominated by machines. The rise of the Adeptus Mechanicus is an undeniable force in the galaxy. It's clear that the future of warfare in the Imperium will be shaped not by the bravery of superhuman warriors, but by the cold, calculated efficiency of machines. The Space Marines, for all their glory, face an uncertain future, one where they may have to fight not only the enemies of the Imperium, but also their own place in the galaxy. Whether they will rise to meet this new challenge or fall into obscurity remains to be seen, but one thing is clear. The technological revolution led by the Adeptus Mechanicus will change the face of warfare forever, and the Space Marines will have to decide if they can keep up or if they will be left behind. For all their power, for all their noble sacrifice, the Space Marines are not immune to the creeping darkness that can take root within even the most sacred of institutions. The corruption of the Astartes is a slow, insidious process, one that begins in the shadows and threatens to consume everything they once stood for. It's easy to think of the Space Marines as the perfect warriors, unyielding and loyal, ever faithful to the Emperor. But beneath the surface, cracks have started to form within the chapters themselves. Corruption, heresy, and a decline in loyalty are all too real threats to the once unshakable bond that tied the Astartes together. It starts small, whispers among the ranks, doubts in the hearts of those who once believed without question. In a galaxy where war is eternal and hope is a distant dream, it's not surprising that even the most devout warriors might begin to falter. As the millennia pass, the original purpose of the Space Marines, the Emperor's vision of a united humanity, has become increasingly lost in the fog of war. The original ideals that made the Astartes the Emperor's chosen warriors seem like nothing more than old myths, distant tales of a time long gone. Some chapters have struggled to maintain the discipline and honor that once defined them, as the pressures of constant battle begin to take their toll. This corruption is not just a matter of moral failings, it's a deeper rot, a disease that infects the very structure of the Space Marines. The idea of loyalty to the Emperor is increasingly questioned, and many Astartes are finding themselves torn between their oaths and the harsh realities of the universe they inhabit. It's not uncommon for a Space Marine to begin to see the Emperor not as a god, but as a broken, distant figure, trapped in his golden throne, his will distorted by time and the very warp that once gave him power. The truth is, many of the Astartes don't even remember the Emperor as he was. They know him only through ancient texts, legends, and the dogma of their chapter. How can they remain loyal to a man they have never truly known, let alone the fractured and warped image of him that has been passed down through the ages? But it's not just disillusionment with the Emperor that has led to the decline of loyalty. The Space Marine chapters themselves have changed over the centuries. Once united under the banner of the Emperor's vision, they now operate as isolated factions, each with its own interpretation of duty and honor. The Codex Astartes, which was meant to be the unifying text that maintained order and discipline, has become more of a suggestion than a mandate. Some chapters cling to its teachings as if their very lives depended on it, while others, like the Black Templars, have long abandoned it in favor of their own path. This lack of unity has led to a breakdown in the once sacred bonds that held the Space Marines together. The loyalty between chapters, once rock solid, is now more fragile than ever. It's here that the true danger lies, the space between loyalty to the Emperor and the temptation of the unknown. The forces of chaos, always lurking at the edges of the galaxy, have long sought to corrupt the Astartes. Their allure is not just in the power they offer, but in the promise of freedom from the rigid, oppressive structure of the Imperium. Chaos represents something that the Space Marines cannot easily ignore. It offers a way out, a path to a new kind of power, a new form of strength that doesn't rely on blind obedience or the shackles of history. The heresy of Horus was just the beginning. Since then, the forces of chaos have planted seeds of rebellion within the hearts of Astartes. The whispers of the chaos gods, ever present in the warp, call to those who are willing to listen. And with every passing century, more and more Astartes find themselves tempted by the siren song of chaos, questioning their loyalty, and in some cases, falling to its embrace. The corruption of the Astartes is not just a matter of individual failings. It's a systemic issue, a breakdown in the very fabric of what made them strong in the first place. When the chapters were founded, they were united under a singular cause, bound by loyalty to the Emperor. But now, with the passage of time, that unity has eroded. Some chapters, like the Ultramarines, remain steadfast in their devotion to the Emperor's will, but even they are not immune to the changes sweeping through the galaxy. Others, like the Word-Bearers, have long since abandoned the Emperor and turned their worship to the dark gods of chaos. The line between loyalty and heresy has blurred, and it's becoming harder and harder to distinguish the Astartes from the very traitors they once fought. This breakdown in unity is compounded by the increasing isolation of individual chapters. The Space Marines were originally created to be the Emperor's elite warriors, soldiers who would lead the charge into battle and inspire those around them. But over time, the chapters have become more insular, focused on their own survival rather than the survival of the Imperium as a whole. The bond between the Astartes and the people they swore to protect has weakened, and the chapters have become more like private armies than a unified force. Each chapter now follows its own interpretation of duty, and while they may still fight for the Imperium, they no longer fight together. The idea of a united front against the galaxy's enemies is a distant memory. Fans often debate whether this decline in loyalty is inevitable. Some believe that the Space Marines, with their deep-rooted sense of honor and duty, will always remain loyal to the Emperor, no matter the challenges they face. Others, however, argue that the very nature of the Astartes, created to be warriors above all else, makes them susceptible to corruption. In a galaxy where betrayal is commonplace, where the forces of chaos constantly seek to undermine humanity, how can any force, no matter how powerful, remain pure? The theories abound, each fan offering their own take on what the future holds for the Astartes. Some suggest that the Space Marines are simply experiencing a crisis of faith, one that they will ultimately overcome, returning to their roots and rediscovering the honor and duty that once made them great. Others fear that the Space Marines are doomed to continue down the path of corruption, with more and more chapters succumbing to the temptations of chaos, until eventually the once proud defenders of the Imperium are no more than another fractured group of heretics. The internal issues within the Astartes are a reminder that even the greatest of warriors are not immune to the ravages of time. The Space Marines, for all their power, are a product of the same Imperium they defend, a flawed, decaying empire that struggles to hold on to its past. Whether they will overcome their internal strife and regain their place as humanity's ultimate defenders, or fall victim to the same darkness that once consumed the traitor, legions remains to be seen. One thing is certain, however: the Space Marines' greatest threat may not be the enemies they face on the battlefield, but the corruption that festers within their very ranks. In the grim darkness of the far future, the Space Marines have long been humanity's greatest weapon. Superhuman soldiers, genetically enhanced to withstand the horrors of the galaxy, they have faced down innumerable threats in the Emperor's name. However, as time moves on, the nature of warfare evolves, and new forces rise to challenge the Space Marines' place in the galaxy. One of the most significant changes to the galaxy's power dynamics has been the growing influence of Psychers, the gifted individuals who wield the powers of the warp. And it's not just the Psychers of the Imperium, but also new, unimaginable forms of power that threaten to upset the balance and challenge the Space Marines' traditional role in combat and strategy. Psychers have always existed in the Warhammer 40K universe, but their influence has never been as pervasive or as powerful as it is now. The Emperor himself was one of the most powerful Psychers ever to walk the galaxy, and the Adeptus Astartes were designed to be his perfect soldiers, relying on their physical strength and combat prowess. However, over time, Psychers have grown in number and strength. The Imperium's reliance on Psychers for communication, navigation, and even combat has become more and more pronounced. The Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, now fields entire units of sanctioned Psychers, each one capable of unleashing devastating powers on the battlefield. The Inquisition, too, uses Psychers for various purposes, and while they are often feared and mistrusted, their power cannot be denied. What's even more unsettling, however, is the rise of new forms of psychic power that threaten to replace the Space Marines' traditional methods of combat. The forces of chaos have always had access to powerful Psychers, but now these same forces are gaining more and more influence. Chaos Psychers, or sorcerers, can manipulate the warp in ways that the Imperium can only begin to comprehend. Their abilities are not bound by the same restrictions that the Imperium's Psychers face. They draw on the raw power of the Chaos Gods, and with each passing century, their power grows stronger. The Thousand Sons, once loyal Astartes, are a perfect example of the growing strength of Chaos Psychers. These once noble warriors have become twisted sorcerers, wielding terrifying power that can warp the very fabric of reality. Meanwhile, the rise of the Tyranids, the galaxy's ultimate predatory swarm, has also brought new forms of psychic power into the fold. The Tyranids' hive mind is a singular consciousness, a psychic entity so vast that it can control the movements and evolution of billions of creatures across entire hive fleets. This psychic force, though not traditionally seen as individual psychers, is capable of influencing the galaxy in ways that rival the power of even the most potent human psyker. It's said that the Tyranids' hive mind can manipulate the very warp itself, making them a terrifying force for the Space Marines to contend with. The psychic power of the Tyranids isn't just another weapon. It is an existential threat that cannot be easily countered by the tactics the Space Marines rely on. This growing prevalence of psychic power has far-reaching consequences. For millennia, the Space Marines have relied on their martial strength and close combat skills, honed to perfection by the Emperor's design. But now they are increasingly facing enemies whose strength lies in the manipulation of the very fabric of reality. The Tyranids' hive mind can control entire swarms of alien creatures with a single thought, while Chaos Psychers can unleash cataclysmic power, tearing apart the very universe around them. In contrast, the Space Marines' traditional tactics, based on physical strength and weaponry, feel increasingly inadequate in the face of such overwhelming psychic might. These new powers aren't bound by the limitations of human flesh. They are able to reach into realms beyond mortal understanding, manipulating the very forces of nature and reality itself. Some fans have speculated that this shift could signal the decline of the Space Marines' dominance on the battlefield. Their reliance on brute force, while still formidable, cannot stand up against enemies who can reshape reality with nothing more than a thought. The power of Psychers has become a force that the Space Marines cannot easily counter. Even their greatest warriors, the Librarians, those who wield psychic powers themselves, are dwarfed by the sheer scale of power that Chaos and the Tyranids bring to the table. The Imperium's own Psychers, while powerful, remain shackled by the strict rules and limitations placed on them by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. They cannot wield the same raw, untamed power as their enemies, leaving them vulnerable to the growing tide of psychic influence that threatens to overwhelm them. For some, this marks the beginning of a paradigm shift, a move away from the old ways of fighting wars, relying on physical strength and the simple power of the sword. In a galaxy where entire swarms of enemies can be controlled by a single mind, where sorcerers can bend the very laws of nature to their will, the old ways of combat may no longer be enough. The Space Marines, for all their power, are increasingly finding themselves at a disadvantage in this new age of psychic warfare. The rise of new forms of power, from the Tyranids' hive mind to the sorcerers of chaos, suggests that the future of warfare in the 41st millennium will be shaped by the manipulation of the warp and psychic energy, not just the force of a bolter and the weight of a chainsword. Some fans believe that this could spell the end of the Space Marines' dominance on the battlefield. With new threats and powers emerging from every corner of the galaxy, the Space Marines may no longer be able to maintain their place at the top of the Imperium's military hierarchy. The galaxy is changing, and the old ways of war, relying on the might of the Space Marines, may be fading away. But others argue that the Astartes, with their adaptability and incredible tenacity, will rise to meet the challenge. They have survived countless battles, faced impossible odds, and adapted to the ever-changing nature of warfare. They may not be able to match the raw psychic power of their enemies, but they can still fight with unparalleled skill and determination. The future of the Space Marines is uncertain. Will they continue to be the galaxy's mightiest warriors, or will the rise of Psychers and new powers mark the end of their reign? It's a question that many fans are grappling with as they watch the galaxy change before their eyes. The growing influence of Psychers, from the Imperium's sanctioned Psychers to the ever-present forces of chaos, has made it clear that the future of warfare is no longer just about physical might. The Space Marines will need to adapt, evolve, and perhaps embrace new forms of power themselves if they hope to remain relevant in the face of these overwhelming psychic forces. One thing is for certain: the era of brute strength and sword fighting is coming to an end, and the galaxy's future will be shaped by the minds that can manipulate the very fabric of reality itself. The age of the Space Marines, once an unshakable pillar of the Imperium's might, now faces a future fraught with uncertainty. The galaxy that once bowed before their might is changing, and with it, so too must the Space Marines evolve if they are to remain relevant. The question of whether the Space Marines' era is truly coming to an end is one that weighs heavily on the minds of fans and theorists alike. For so long, they were the pinnacle of humanity's military might, the Emperor's greatest creation, standing as the bulwark against the endless waves of horror that threatened to engulf the galaxy. But with the rise of new technologies, the growing influence of Psychers, the fracturing of the Imperium, and the emergence of new, terrifying factions, the Space Marines are no longer the unchallenged force they once were. The Tyranids, Necrons, and the forces of chaos have forced the Astartes to fight battles unlike any they've faced before, where once their strength and discipline alone could turn the tide of a war. Now they face enemies whose power is beyond the comprehension of even the most battle-hardened Astartes. The sheer scale of the Tyrannid swarm, the near immortality of the Necrons, and the maddening power of chaos are forces that cannot be fought by brute strength alone. The Space Marines are a symbol of humanity's greatest potential, yes, but they are also a relic of an older time, one where the galaxy was still a place of traditional warfare, of armies clashing in grand battles. The galaxy has moved on, and the Space Marines are struggling to keep up. Some fans hold out hope that the Space Marines will adapt, that they will evolve alongside the changing face of war. These warriors are known for their resilience and their ability to overcome impossible odds, and many believe they will find a way to survive in a galaxy that seems increasingly hostile to their traditional ways of combat. They may not be able to match the raw psychic power of the Chaos Sorcerers or the adaptive ferocity of the Tyrannids, but their sheer tenacity, loyalty, and unyielding will could carry them through the darkest of times. The Space Marines are not just warriors, they are symbols of humanity's indomitable spirit, and that spirit is not easily extinguished. Others, however, believe that the Space Marines are on the precipice of extinction. The rise of the Adeptus Mechanicus, with their technological superiority, and the growing influence of psychers, has made the traditional role of the Space Marines increasingly obsolete. Machines are becoming more advanced, weapons more destructive, and the nature of warfare is evolving in ways that the Space Marines were never designed to contend with. In a galaxy where super-heavy war machines, autonomous drones, and psychic powers dominate the battlefield, the Space Marines' reliance on physical strength and close combat tactics seems increasingly out of place. As the Imperium looks for alternative forms of defense, the Space Marines may find themselves sidelined, their role reduced to that of ceremonial warriors rather than the galaxy's greatest protectors. Yet, even in the face of these challenges, there's a deep, underlying truth. The Space Marines are not just warriors, they are a symbol. They are a manifestation of the Emperor's will, his unyielding desire to see humanity thrive in a galaxy filled with darkness. Even if their role in the galaxy changes, their legacy will never be erased. The Space Marines have stood as humanity's bulwark for millennia, and no matter what the future holds, their story will remain an integral part of the Imperium's history. It's true that the galaxy is evolving, and the Space Marines must evolve with it. Some chapters, like the Ultramarines, have already begun to adapt, integrating new technologies and strategies into their tactics. Others, like the Black Templars, remain steadfast in their traditions, refusing to bend to the changing tides of warfare. It's this tension between tradition and adaptation that defines the Space Marines in the modern age. They are both timeless and of their time, warriors who have fought for millennia, but who now find themselves facing a galaxy that no longer needs them in the same way. How they reconcile these two identities will determine their future. The fan theories surrounding the fate of the Space Marines are as varied as they are passionate. Some suggest that the Astartes will undergo a radical transformation, one that incorporates the new powers of the galaxy into their ranks. Perhaps they will forge alliances with the Adeptus Mechanicus, becoming not just warriors but masters of both flesh and machine. Others believe that the Space Marines will turn inward, focusing on their own chapters, each becoming increasingly isolated from the Imperium they once served. In this view, the Astartes would slowly fade from prominence, becoming relics of a past age, no longer the champions of humanity, but instead fading symbols of an Imperium that no longer exists. There's also the theory that the Space Marines will ultimately be replaced, not by other factions or armies, but by something even more insidious: the very technological advancements that they once relied on. The rise of artificial intelligence, the ever-growing power of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the increasing use of psychic powers all suggest that humanity may eventually look beyond the Astartes and turn to these new forms of power for protection. This would mark the ultimate betrayal of the Astartes' purpose, a final abandonment of the very ideals they were created to protect. Yet, in the cold, calculating logic of the Imperium, such a shift may be inevitable. But for all the challenges the Space Marines face, there's still a glimmer of hope. As long as there are enemies to fight, as long as there are battles to be won, the Space Marines will continue to fight. Their purpose may evolve, their tactics may change, but their core, strength, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to the Emperor will remain the same. The galaxy may no longer be a place where the Space Marines are the undisputed masters of war, but they will always be a force to be reckoned with. In the darkest of times, the Astartes will be there, fighting not just for survival, but for the ideals they've sworn to uphold. The age of the Space Marines may be coming to an end, but the legacy of their warriors will never fade. They are more than soldiers. They are a symbol of humanity's will to survive in a galaxy where survival is never guaranteed. And even in the face of overwhelming odds, they will continue to fight, adapting, evolving, and doing what they have always done, defending humanity, no matter the cost. Whether they remain the galaxy's greatest warriors or fade into history as mere relics, the Space Marines will forever be remembered as the Emperor's chosen, forever bound by blood, honor, and duty to the Imperium. As the galaxy continues to evolve, so too must the Space Marines, adapting to new threats and changing warfare. But even as their role shifts, their legacy remains unshaken. The Space Marines are more than just soldiers. They are the embodiment of humanity's will to survive, the eternal guardians of the Imperium, bound by duty, honor, and an unwavering commitment to the Emperor. Whether they continue to dominate the battlefield or fade into history, their impact will echo through the ages. The age of the Space Marines may be evolving, but their story will never be forgotten. If you believe the Astartes still have a place in this galaxy, or if you think their time has passed, share your thoughts. And if you want to keep exploring the future of Warhammer 40K and more, don't forget to subscribe.